Hello and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. Today, we're talking about planning for a session. I know, really fun, right? Well, actually, yeah. Obviously, most of the time you're going to be spending with the campaign is going to be in planning, and honestly, I kind of enjoy the puzzle-like aspects of it, but doing it over and over again can sometimes get a little monotonous and begin to kind of drag you down a little bit as a DM, and my first trick is all about that. So, let's move on with the episode, and today, let's learn something. I want to say first, this is just how I do things, and I'm actually starting to notice my planning style start to change a little bit, so I'll address that as it becomes relevant. But the first point is, I plan for overall arcs, adventures, locations, whatever you want to call them, at a time. What this means is if my players are starting a fetch quest, for example, I take a few weeks before I know they're going to do it and plan that quest out. I do the same thing for locations, so if they're going to a swamp, I'll do the same thing a few weeks ahead of time, I'll make the swamp. One of the reasons why I do this is because it streamlines my planning, and that I won't have to do any more major planning for a little while. It'll just mainly be updating and reviewing for a few weeks, and honestly that works better for me. And this leaves me more able to flexibly adapt to anything unexpected that might happen because I have more time to plan for those unexpected things, because I'm spending less time creating things in between sessions and more time reviewing for what did happen, could happen, stuff like that. But more on that later. For now, let's talk a little bit about some of the downsides to this and why I'm kind of a little bit starting to diverge from the style. One potential pitfall might appear in those more open-ended games. I'll put a link below and a card above if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about that. When the plot begins to diverge a little, you'll plan for a whole arc and then your players might go somewhere else. And this is fine because you should always have backup plans, but if you've already spent so much time on one huge arc, your backup plans may not be all that interesting in comparison, and let's be honest, none of us want to exhaust ourselves. And that's why I used to, and still really do, don't know why I said used to, plan by location. If the quest requires some players to go to a certain place, they won't really be able to do anything else too major unless you plan for it to be there, and even there you plan for it so you're ready. That's why planning by location is so robust. But if your game is more open-ended, your players will probably have all kinds of goals, lots of goals, and planning will require you to have so many plots and locations planned out ahead of time. And what this means is that individually these quests might not be all that great, and then by the time they get there, the plot might have changed anyway. So what I do is this. I wait until I know for sure what's going to happen, where they're going and what they're doing. For example, if they're going to a prison, I know they're getting arrested, I'll plan the prison. If they're going to a swamp, I know that, I'll plan the swamp. And then about a week before the session, or that arc would start, I plan then, so I know for sure that that's where they're going to be. So I'd have the entire arc planned, I'd have NPCs in the back of my mind, I'd have locations, I'd have encounters, all that stuff ready to go, so I'll only have to prepare and review for what's going to happen for whatever given session I'm actually about to have when I actually set in to prepare for that session. But what I've started doing more recently is I've begun planning for only what I'll need in a given session. I'll have the entire arc in the back of my mind, I'll think about where it's going and where it's at, but I'll only really plan and create for the immediate goal. In a way, this is only a really subtle difference. I'm still planning out as much as I can, I'm thinking ahead as far as I can, and sometimes this goal or whatever is happening will stretch out across multiple sessions like an entire arc. But I'm not limiting myself to a very specific set of, it's this adventure, this place, this quest, this whatever. I had initially thought when doing this new style that this would give me less time to plan for the unexpected because I'd be spending more time planning for whatever I have to create for that session, but I find that I'm still able to do that same level of tailoring the session to anything new that might have happened than I was able to do before. In fact, for campaigns that are more open-ended or for mysteries that by definition are going to have a lot of branching off points, I find that I'm better able to create all the branches and potential encounters that I'll need better with this style. I will also say that you need to keep this in mind if you're going to try this out. You do need to have a basic idea of where things are going, even if you don't plan specifically to the very end. It might be easy to forget that, seeing that we don't plan specifically for the end of this method, but it's still just as important to do so. But that was a lot of overall type of stuff. What about the planning itself? Well, my next point is all about that. I've talked a lot about branching out and planning for different possibilities so far, so let's continue out from there. I've said this many times before, but when I'm planning, I like to think about all the major deviations from the plot that can occur in a given session. Let's say your players are investigating a murder. They may look at the crime scene, they may look at the victim's house, they may go to a lot of different places. You need to have every place they can immediately go to and every place they can conceivably learn about in one session planned out. So I'm not seeing you get a break from planning. Now, they'll also obviously, probably more than likely, go to places you didn't expect, but I have many other techniques that I use to either nudge them back in this direction or repurpose a given encounter to suit what they need to know. And I have a whole couple episodes all about that and about how I plan for encounters and all about player randomness and stuff like that. And so I'll link those in the description below and I'll put a card above so you can watch those if you want to. I also want to say that in these more broad overarching plot things, you don't necessarily need to plan out specifically where, in this case, the murderer might be. Like, you don't need to have a specific encounter in mind in the very beginning, because your players probably won't find them in the very beginning. But you do need to know where they're at and what they're doing and how you plan on introducing them in the end. This helps kind of keep you on track. It also helps you know what's going on in the background so you can react to things your players might do what the villain would realistically do. And it also can help be ready in case you do have to introduce the villain a little bit early, because you'll already kind of know where they are and what they're doing, what they're up to. And this idea of having these things in the back of your mind doesn't just work with overall plot stuff. It also helps you think about what your players do to try to solve a problem you give to them. Obviously, not every solution they're going to try out is going to work. Not every path they go down is going to give them information, but doing this helps you plan for how you're going to respond when those things happen. If your players, for example, decide to go way off course because they think information they need is going to be there, how are you going to respond? Will you change the story in the background so the information they need is there? Maybe it's conceivable that the bad guy did actually go there. Or maybe you'll plan to have something else happen over there in that location they go to that opens up an arc for one of the characters or just an interesting encounter. Maybe they learn something else related to the plot that does happen there. Again, another reason why planning, at least in part, by location is so robust. And for little things, say your players don't go to some really far off location, they just try a solution, they ask a certain NPC about information that they wouldn't have, that wouldn't work. You don't have to always give them something. There's nothing wrong with saying they don't know or that doesn't work. Occasionally that's going to happen. But what about alternative solutions that would actually work? Which ones would work? Obviously, you don't know what they're going to do, but if you already have a number of alternative solutions in your mind, you can be kind of flexible when they think of something new. Maybe one of the ones you had in mind is similar. Well, now you have a point to kind of build off of when reacting to what your players do. But other than that, use your own judgment. If one of your players has a solution that's kind of cool and would feasibly work, by all means, let them try it out. Or for overall plot stuff, if they think a certain NPC might know something and you didn't think of that before in your planning and you realize, oh wait, this NPC might actually know this, by all means, let them try. They might find something new. Again, we're all writing and coming up with this story together as we go, so be open for that kind of stuff. And all of this kind of reminds me of another thing that I like to do, and that is planning for extra encounters. So let's talk about that for a little while next. Now, I've talked a little bit about planning for additional encounters before on this channel, but that was mainly in the context of more open-ended campaigns. So how does it apply here? Well, it may not be as extensive, and it may not come as frequently, and those extra encounters may not be as crucial as turning points like they often will be in more open-ended games, but it is still super important that you have some. Let's look back at location, because of course we're looking back at location. You know how I plan at this point. If your players decide to leave a given place early, but you don't have the next place figured out or haven't fully planned it out yet, a backup encounter can go a long way. I believe I've given this example on this channel before, but it's still relevant here, so I'm going to tell it again. I once had a group of players in a swamp. They just defeated a kind of a mini boss. They were ready to leave, and the next location was a city, but I didn't have the city planned out yet. Luckily, I was able to divert their attention with a well-placed trap door, but I had backup plans in case they didn't go through it. The trap door actually led to where I wanted them to go to, but where they wanted to go was a path that led down a river. They wanted to leave the place they were in, and if they did, I had an old NPC that's going to come back into play, and I had a few encounters ready for them that involve some fast-paced currents and some dangerous fish. But these kinds of backup encounters can do far more than just transition to a new place you hadn't planned for. Like I'm saying with everything else at this point, you can repurpose them. What I do is keep every encounter that I have planned for but didn't use in a folder somewhere, either on my computer or on my phone. Building this kind of graveyard of unused encounters, I like to call it. I can either pull from that, or I can pull from unused encounters from my current campaign that didn't end up making it into the full story, and use those if something goes wrong, if something goes unexpected. That way I have a kind of arsenal to pull from. And even then, I don't usually use them exactly, but rather, as I said before, I kind of have to repurpose them for whatever's going on at the time. And who knows, those random encounters, not actual random encounters, but unexpected encounters rather, might make all the difference. You might end up being able to build up more in your current arc from them, or even branch off into a whole new arc. They might become a big branching plot point. And again, they really do make a world of difference. But my next point goes back to the timing of your planning, and it's plan early. Now, you may not plan the entire arc super early like I used to and still kind of do, but you may want to plan for a session early. After session ends, I don't wait until a few minutes before the next session to plan. That just strikes me as putting things off to the last minute, and I'm not about to do that. With this game and with these kinds of games in general, you really need to give yourself time to plan. You need to know where the story might branch out, where the encounters might branch, and what's going to happen this session, and even where the story might go. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I like to start thinking about and planning and preparing for the next session as early as I can. Sometimes it's the day immediately after the previous session. Sometimes I have to plan some free time aside to do it. And this is the time that I take to plan the things that are actually going to happen. I think about the particular arc or adventure they're going into and other things that might be happening. I plan for encounters that I'll need. I'll create encounters. I might build an NPC if I need to. I'll think out about as far as I can, and I'll try to reflect on where they just were so that I can transition into any new encounters and things in case I need to in that scenario. And then I'll start branching out and thinking about everything. Sometimes that requires me to start building new things and the process starts over again. But that's all before the actual day of the session. What do I do on the day of the session? Well, my next point is going to be all about that. I tried to build off what I said in that last point and plan early. I try to start as early as I can of the day so I know I have time to plan for everything. And because I already made most of what I need, all I really need to do at this point is review so that I know I'm ready. In the midst of that review, I might occasionally actually find holes in my preparation, and I will have to build up a few more things. Usually it's stuff like preparing spells for bosses, making little environmental changes and stuff like that. I also may have to review certain rules in case I have a certain effect planned. For example, if I have a monster prepared that can paralyze people, I may want to review that condition. I'll also review things that happened in the previous session or sessions. Sometimes things change. We need to improv and make a new NPC. I'll take little notes, like I said, in the middle of a session, and then during this time before the session, I'll kind of review those and see if we need to make any little last minute adjustments. And that's it for this episode. Don't worry though, I still have a lot more to talk about in terms of planning. Come back next week. We'll talk a little bit about how I deal with DM or GM fatigue. It's a very real obstacle and a real pain when it does end up happening. And also be sure to come back for another character backstory from a character that I played in the past. And of course, till next time, let's learn something.